So there's people out there who are interested in these faculty learning communities, and I wanted to talk a little bit about it and get your feel for what sorts of things you might be interested in, and also how we might be able to sort of roll these things out. I want to talk a little bit about what faculty learning communities are and what sorts of things you folks might be interested in doing, and how we might sort of try to connect these across campus. I mean, the basic premise of a faculty learning community is that it's a small, almost a working group. And the way I want to structure them here is to give a group a semester or a year to work on a particular topic that they're interested in. And I'd like the idea of having people from across schools or units working together on these issues so that they can begin to consider the different perspectives. So at the end of the year or the semester, and I think a year is a more reasonable amount of time, it would result in some kind of product, either a white paper or presentation to the community. Ideally, a conference presentation would be great to see come out of one of these. But the idea being hopefully school, across unit collaboration and looking at these topics from a variety of perspectives. I actually believe that one of the real benefits of the faculty learning community is you begin to de-silo the college a bit, but also it helps with your own sort of thinking about these things because you hear all of these different perspectives from different people who have vastly different experiences. I was part of one of these several years ago, and it was one of the first times I had really been, this was several years, this was 20 years ago, I had heard about the implementation of service learning in classes. This was when I was in Pennsylvania. I knew a little bit about service projects, and I had heard about service projects that were like study abroad, but I became part of this experiential education learning community, and there were a couple of departments on campus that had service learning embedded and threaded throughout their course. And it was this sort of eye-opening experience to me about how you can use the community as a classroom for your students to really make a difference in the community, but also to learn some skills that they hadn't learned otherwise. So they're valuable experiences for faculty. And I think they're a nice way for faculty to begin to talk to other faculty about maybe even pedagogical approaches. So let's say you've done these before, but you have a different approach to it from another department. So the idea of today was to talk a little bit about how we might structure these here at Springfield College, and also how we might begin to look at topics that people might be interested in. I mentioned the experiential education one, and I just want to know what people think about that topic first, and then see what other topics come up.
Sure. I think experiential learning and using the community sort of, or branching out the classroom into the community, to me, it's an absolutely fascinating concept. And I think it gives purpose to a lot of the concepts that we're trying to help students struggle with. So for one of, like in my classes, not this semester, but I teach an event management class. And yeah, I can talk about the components of events, and I can do that. I can even probably have them do a small little event in class. I could do that, but normally what we do is we reach out to the community and we ask for how we can help in meaningful events. So like last semester we did 5 different events, community events. One of them was, and I won't go through all of them, but one of them, for example, was with Frederick Harris School. And they wanted to do an event where they can have a basketball, sort of series of basketball games. The first year we did it, it was like teachers versus students. That was interesting. Then the second year we did it with different grades amongst them, so we involved more students. And the intent was to see if we can raise, not only to build cohesion and a nice event for students, from us, it was a way of bringing the community that's so close to us into Springfield College and let them see and play even on the basketball court and feel Springfield College, so that, when they're thinking down the line, it might be a place. But for them also, it was a nice way of generating revenues. And their goal was really to generate enough money to send one grade on a field trip. So, but things like that, and then we can so it brings it to life.
Yeah. And Stephanie, considering the fact that your department is so involved in the schools, there seems to be some kind of at least in my mind, some overlap there because he did it with a public school, and it's got a different set of goals, though. So I mean, I'm not sure what your thoughts are on it, but I mean, I think I look at the school, the Department of Education, as one that's been doing this forever. And how do you manage all of those students, and how do you make that an effective learning experience?
But you know what, I personally, just my knowledge and understanding of, kind of have the distinction between service learning and experiential learning, even though we use a lot of these terms interchangeably, or even civic engagement, I would not consider what we do any of those. Okay. I mean, the sense of it is, hey, we need to place these students so that they can learn. I think a lot of we put a lot on them without, we're asking them well, there's a lot of the reciprocity. I think that's a bit, what is missing. We are turning quite a bit of instruction over to them without necessarily the giving back.
Yeah, I think, and it's an interesting point. I think I use experiential learning as the umbrella term for all of those other things, because I think you're right. They all have different sort of tweaks. The service learning programs, and there are people now who don't want to call it service learning anymore. They want to call it learning service because of the goals of it. So I think they're all slightly different. And the idea of experiential, in my mind, is going beyond the classroom, sort of an umbrella term. But I think you're right. I mean, it's interesting how you say that, because the student teaching experience and the observation experiences they're different. They're different. So,
but and I don't like, when I think of what was described, or just described by my colleague here, I see that under that umbrella, whereas I don't see kind of what not in all cases, because there are exceptions, to that, but in thinking about student teaching or those observational experiences, they are very one-sided, and I would not consider them experiential in the same sense as what was just described. So that's what
I think in my department we felt similarly. So I had a colleague who would have her students do service projects at their sites as they were, so the library needed to be refurbished. So, and she called that service learning. And I was like, I don't think that's service learning. That's like community service. So I tried for a year in methods courses where we did community engagement projects, and this came out of when the CAP was coming out and all that, and they had to do family and community engagement, and they did of their own expertise, what is the need of this school that I can help serve, and they did a project around that. So that was a possibility, but I think on a typical basis, no, what we do, I don't think it fits.
Well, and that's I think really an interesting distinction to help faculty begin to see, because I think you're right. It's the same as, and I know this is going to call yet another thing to talk about, but study abroad is sometimes considered under that umbrella. But is it? And study abroad, and I'm not quite sure how study abroad is managed here yet, but when I was at Quinnipiac, I referred to the study abroad in two camps. We had the study abroad, and then we had student tourism, where essentially for some of the study abroad trips, the students would essentially go for 4 months to Australia and drink and then come back. And it wasn't a really cultural experience, because they went to a university that was really an American university, and they didn't interact with a lot of people from Australia. And it was very much just a place to go for 4 months, versus a study abroad experience where you go and you're actually in the culture. So I see this kind of different ways of doing. I mean, I don't know if any of you have ever done. I led a study abroad trip one time, and I was stunned when my students were like, "Wait, what do we have to do? You gotta go into the culture. Why?" So
and so I had the opportunity, and a lot of it was a program that was already set up. This was like, somebody go, so the students can go. So I did it. But it started out very much, we were just touring, and we went to China. So of course you tour.
Of course you do, yeah.
You look at things,
You drink.
No, I didn't, but yes, they did. They did.
In Europe, they sure do.
Just to be real, they did. I mean, you have to go to the drink. Well, I mean, you have to. I mean, it was that. But one of the things that we did, which made it different than what I would say the student teaching, it was this partnership with an elementary middle school there. And our students, in collaboration with kind of pre-service teachers there, ran an English summer camp for students. So it was through design. They helped design it. They developed lessons. They had, Chinese teaching partners and all of that. So it was this sense of being immersed in what it was they are to do in the future, having to learn the culture, having to understand, yes, I am working with young people. Some of them cannot speak a lick of English. What will this look like when you get back to the States? Because the assumption is that every child that will step in your classroom will speak English, even in Iowa, but that's not the case in Iowa, believe it or not. Des Moines Public Schools has 400 languages spoken, So that sense of blending the two, whereas they drunk on the weekends, but you better be sober on Monday.
Yeah. It is interesting. Has anyone else ever led a study abroad trip? So that is the thing. I mean, I remember telling my students, Monday morning class is at 8:00, and you should be. And they showed up. They weren't always looking great, but they showed up at 8:00 in the morning. We were in London, and they were hitting the pubs hard. But they also the same sort of thing. I mean, there was this enculturation where we spent a lot of time doing things that I believe were touristy, but also to help them understand the culture so they could do the kinds of work that I wanted them to do. But I think that's so this is sort of a model for like a faculty learning community as we're talking about this now to get different people's different perspectives on it. And so this is just one experiential, however you want to define it, would be one. But what other kinds of communities do you think we could have here that would cut across schools and disciplines that might bring people together? Because I could see this, by the way, being a nice sort of presentation to the faculty where we could draw out some of these distinctions and talk to faculty about how the classroom is one way we provide education, but there's other ways, and here are some of the other ways we do it that have this benefit. The student teaching does this for our students. Experiential education, doing community outreach like Ariel does it this way. So we can begin to start to think about how we can best adapt that to what we do in our disciplines. Because honestly, I think that most disciplines have the opportunity and the ability to do something that would go beyond the classroom, but it's a matter of how you make it sort of work while being sort of true to your discipline. And that's where I think some people try to they haven't thought through how to make it work with their discipline. So, I mean, Ian Delahanty does a lot of these trips where he takes students all over the place for history, and they're great. The students come away with a really deeper understanding because he's brought them to these places. And you think in the humanities, there are ways to do it. You just have to be sort of creative and think about it. So, but what else? What other communities do you think would be interesting?
I'd be interested in learning about different teaching formats. So
sort of like a pedagogy.
Yeah, pedagogy kind of thing. Okay. Flipped classroom, but gamification, these kinds of things. I'd personally be interested.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of things that could be done with that kind of faculty learning community, because as you go across, I mean, you're in a traditional arts and science discipline,
right? And
so my guess is your PhD was very traditionally taught.
Right.
And you come to a college like this where you have these very different kinds of disciplines. I mean, one of the things that has surprised me the most about doing my job is how differently health science professionals approach the classroom versus people who've gone through more traditional academic disciplines. Because the health science folks, the degrees that they tend to earn are so professionally oriented and so practically oriented, right, that their approach to the class is very structured,
right,
and very much flipped classrooms work for it because it's very structured, but it's a kind of a different approach than people who've gone through more traditional programs. Not saying it's better, it's different. And you sit in those classrooms and you see the students. It's a different feel. So I think that would be a really interesting one. And there's lots of different pedagogical approaches that exist out there. I mean, my thought on something like that is there are books that have these different kinds of ideas in there that the group could work through and discuss the different chapters of the books and how they might be able to apply some of those things.
Like in math, there's the Moore method, which is this idea of basically, I mean, it's kind of flipped classroom, but it's to the extreme. It's like the students structure the course, and the instructor selects the textbook, but the students, plan how the course is going to be run, essentially, like proving theorems. What theorems are we going to work on today, and I mean, the professor facilitates with basically handing out his notes and, again, picking the textbook, but the students, select what sections to cover, and they do the presentations in the class, like every class. So, I mean, it's like extreme flips, right?
There's a number of inquiry-based classrooms that are designed that way, where the instructor walks in with no idea of the content that's going to be discussed, but they have a model for how inquiry will work, and the students will select the topic, and the professor will become part of the class and do that. And I've seen it, and it can work really well. It's scary for the instructor because they don't know what's going to be discussed.
That's right.
And instructors tend to like to know what's going to happen.
True, but it almost makes the instructor the student in a sense.
It does. And then there's other takes on that. I mean, have any of you ever heard of POGLE? This is big in the natural sciences. It's process-oriented guided instructional learning. So it's essentially, it's kind of problem-based inquiry. It's goal-oriented, so you have a little bit of control, but you give the students the space to develop the approach to solve the problem. So you start with a problem, and then you teach them a little bit about how to do a number of different strategies and students select the direction they want to go in. It gives the students freedom and flexibility, but it's like walking a thicker tightrope than the inquiry-based one. So you have a little bit more balance, but and there's other approaches like that are really interesting. So that could be one that I think would be really interesting to look at. Other ones people think might be kind of interesting.
I don't know if I would want to do this one, but I was thinking from our humanities department, I bet teaching writing and reading, I think that could cut across lots of different disciplines because it's everywhere. So I'd be curious what would come out of a conversation about that. How to do that well.
I have a lot to say about that. So at my last job, I was in charge of the center, and I had within the center the Writing Across the Curriculum program. And the Writing Across the Curriculum program at Quinnipiac is very different than any place I've ever seen, where they treat writing and reading as critical skills that every student needs to master, but there's no writing intensive courses. Faculty go through training on how to embed writing and reading instruction into each of their classes. And they have data that show the students are more efficient at this. And we could talk about that for a long time. But what was interesting about it was that even though the the faculty went through was all the same, they would go through these 2-day training sessions on how to do this. The implementation was so dramatically different across disciplines that it's the kind of thing that I think would get a lot of people interested. So, for example, one of the biggest proponents of this program was a mathematician, and she did a lot with writing in her math class, and it was fascinating to see how she was able to do that. And then some of the people in English really didn't like the approach at all. So, and one of the criticisms was their English 101 course did no grammar or writing mechanics at all. The idea was writing would just eventually become better by practicing it. So their English courses essentially were just literature courses. So there was no writing instruction at all. So no writing student, none of that was given. So it essentially, in a lot of ways, bifurcated the student population. So the good writers got better with a lot of practice, and the bad writers really struggled because their mechanics there was never any sort of feedback on their mechanics. But the good writers became really good writers. So but I think that'd be really interesting. And faculty, one of the biggest complaints that I get from faculty about students is that they don't read. They just don't read what they're assigned. How many of you have struggled with getting students to read? Yeah. It's in part sort of cultural now. My 16-year-old is such a typical 16. Dad, I don't like to read. She reads and she hides it, but none of her friends, it's all sort of a cool thing not to like to read. So she hides her books in her room.
Reading books under.
Yeah, it's so dorky. Yeah, okay, Lily, I know you don't read. You have access to my Audible, my iBooks account. I know what you're reading. I see the books you're downloading. It's fine. I won't tell how your secret's safe with me. But there really is this. So, but then they get here, and one of the things students will often say is that they don't have time to read because they have so much work to do. And so I know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. But so how do you get students to do that? How do you work with students to make reading a more effective process in class? So I think,
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting topic. I think, and I mean, not to solve it, but I know also how do we become creative in using other modalities as well. So it's not just reading it. And I mean, obviously I know the value of reading, but sometimes I want to get my message across differently.
Mhm.
And I'm try my best to meet them halfway as well. And so how do I best do that? So
I did a study about 15 years ago now, looking at reading comprehension as a function of modality. So either read it or audiobook. And what was stunning to me was, because I fully expected big differences in comprehension. I found almost nothing in terms of differences in comprehension between reading and audiobooks. Almost nothing. A couple of inferences that they were more likely to draw with the audiobooks than they were likely to draw with reading. But those were complicated inferences that I think they might have been drifting a little, that were hard to do. But in general, comprehension was pretty much the same. So I do have a great article, by the way, if you want to share with your students. It just came out that is, in my mind, the final nail in the coffin that speed reading doesn't work. So I can share that with you. Because the students always say, well, I'm just a really fast, I just skim it, I can get it. No, you can't. And I got data to prove it right here. So, but I think that's interesting.
I don't know if this is the right format for this, but I'm always interested in what type of problems other faculty are trying to solve.
I think teaching troubles or something like that, or teaching issues, I think would be a really interesting faculty learner community to begin to hear what other people are experiencing in their classes.
And for me, it's like it can be within the classroom, and I'm almost thinking just not just in the classroom, but beyond the classroom.
So, such as?
Like what are they interested in learning about? What sort of what nags them? So what do they need to answer in a critical way? And seeing if there are other faculty that are interested in a similar type of things. If it's I want to really solve community development. We can't solve it. But anyways, I'm just throwing it out there for lack of better words. I want to find other faculty who also want to figure out how do we improve our communities in this context, and see if there's others. Maybe it's a gentleman from math and another person in education. We might come from a different approach, but I just want to see if there are ways of creating communities around shared, I don't want to say shared problems, but shared things that we want to solve, and then figure out how we can creatively solve them.
Given the mission of the college, I think that makes a lot of sense. It would be interesting to see how to frame that to get people to come and have the kinds of thoughts that you're having. But I think it's an interesting conversation. Part of the reason I think the center exists is to try to bring people together to have those conversations, so people can start to talk about and share ideas. So you're writing stuff down, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, good. Because I have to go back and think about this. I'm not taking any notes. I was hoping Kyle was writing stuff down.
You got your time.
Trying
to be quiet about it.
He's recording over there too. So, but I think that gets at the heart of a lot of this, is that how do you get people to begin to have those conversations? And there are lots of these conversations that I really believe are just below the surface when faculty talk to each other, that people share. I mean, the community involvement is one of them, but if you think about, what are some of the common things that you think about that make your life, that if it wasn't there, your life would be a little bit richer, or if it was there, your life would be richer? I mean, that's the way I like to think about it. Like what would make my life richer? Well, it would be interesting if I had an outlet to talk about some of the interests I have in like I was talking about in pedagogy. Like I have but it'd be great to have a place every day where I could come in where I come in and just talk about the stuff on my that's going through my head, right? That would help me sort of work through things, right? Yeah. Like a lot of people, that's kind of nice. And frankly, if you've been in a bigger place and you've been you have colleagues who have your area of expertise right down the hall. At a small school, you don't always have that. So you have to sort of find people who share your interests but aren't, So I happen to have Matt Brubaker, who's a cognitive psychologist. So I can talk to Matt. Matt can be bored by my stuff. Like
I do think I do think there should be something about scholarship. I don't know what form that takes, but some outcome, some outlet for, critical engagement with one another's scholarship.
Well, that brings up an interesting point. Has anyone met, I'm blanking on his name, the new chair of math?
Oh, no.
You're talking about James.
James
O'Brien.
That's right, James.
I hope you have, Tyler.
Our new chair.
That's right, you're new chair. That's right.
I chaired his screening committee.
So James, is James what he looked first to go by or Jim?
James.
James, okay. So James sent me an email like at 2 a.m. I already like this guy because I respond to emails at 2 a.m. sometimes. And James sent me an email. Don't shake your head at me, Steph. It's okay. If I'm up, I'm up. So James sent me an email in the middle of the night last week saying he would like to have a community. And he even has an acronym for it, SC squared. Springfield College Scholars. Such a math guy.
He's physics.
He is physics.
But it's all the same.
But physics.
I know there is math.
The language of physics is math.
Yeah.
And what he wants to do is have people get together and talk about how they do their scholarship here and how it might be different than you do it at other places, but how you're able to make it work effectively at a school that has different sets of resources and different expectations. And I think it's a brilliant idea. I mean, his acronym is cute. But I think it's a great idea. And I do think, Kate, to your point, it's a group to discuss scholarship and how to get your scholarship moving forward and what you're doing, what you're interested in. Because it's not just moving it forward for yourself, but it's also seeing if other people are interested in it.
Well, but we've had that conversation about logistics and how to manage a scholarship. I'm tired. I mean, you get up early in the morning. Whatever you do, you do. But actual let's trade articles.
I was going to say that
actual engagement with the
that
ideas.
was helpful for me in my track to have someone like I had a date that I had to share. They were going to read and give me feedback. That was
terrifying.
Helpful. It was. And to have people who were not in my discipline. Or one group that I was in, it was someone from music. But then even to read hers, she was putting together a book on Dolly Parton and the musical side of her. And so reading someone from psychology who's doing some things about ADHD on a particular Native American reservation, reading, even though I don't do numbers, it was really.
But I think it's really interesting. You're right, to see what other people are doing, and Kate, your point. And we did this with the writing. And I'm going to do those over breaks, the writing groups. It makes you accountable. So it helps you focus so that you do the work and gives you, as you said, a little bit of a terrifying deadline, but you get stuff done. And I agree with you, Steph. I like reading other people's disciplines and I like knowing what other people do. I mean, it's always amazing to me to find out that there are people on campus who do some of the scholarship that they do that's just way outside my area of expertise, and sometimes it overlaps a lot. So
it kind of goes back to what you're saying about conferences last week. If we go there to learn about where our field is going, well, we read other people's work to see where knowledge is going and where we should be going in our research focus. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah. So I think that's Kate. I think that's a really good one. And scholarship is something that I see scholarship in a number of ways. Obviously, I see it in a number of ways. I think. What a scholarship faculty learning community does, it opens up the opportunity to talk about lots of ways of doing scholarship too. So for example, the SODL stuff is, as most of you know, I'm really interested in. I'd love to see people talk a little bit about how they might be able to do that. That's what they're interested in and how we might be able to incorporate that into people's classes because that benefits their scholarship. It also benefits their teaching and can benefit other people's teaching. So I like that idea a lot.
Would it be fair to say that the faculty learning communities then are kind of, to Ariel's point, you're looking at problems to solve and then as a community you're solving them?
Sort of, but I always hesitate to think about an answer at the end.
Right.
Because I like the idea of the work in progress and making progress towards goals, but not having an answer, because I think these things are getting at perpetual questions that just keep going.
Maybe it's almost like an investigation.
Yeah, it's an investigation. So
Exploration.
Right.
There we go. But I do like that idea, and the scholarship one is one that I think would definitely. So the idea for this year, if I'm able, is to have 3, 2, 3, 4, something like that going, so that people can be invested, and we have people to populate these and to share these ideas. I did want to ask, one of the ideas that I think is a default one, but I always like is the book group. And I don't know if people think there'd be an interest in a book group, like taking a look at a book on higher education, or a book on teaching, or a book on scholarship, and delving into it and really having conversations about it. What's that?
So no books on scholarship, just need to do it.
Yeah, well, but when I agree, but maybe something like if people wanted to investigate doing SOTL stuff, so reading some of the literature on what's been done, so you have an idea of how to do it. Not so much about like let's do scholarship, but like, and it's I always have to tread lightly, because what Kate said, I think, if you want to do scholarship, just do it, right? But that's hard to. It's hard for people to juggle sometimes. So
the scholarship learning communities, I think, would probably be one of the more campus sort of wide kind of communities, right? To actually engage in the let me read your most recent paper kind of thing, right? It would be like we'd want a representative from like each department or something. I mean, what would the goal of such a learning committee be? A community be? I mean, I guess to start an initiative on campus or something where you actually are able to trade research. And
what about reading people's work in progress? I mean, I think that's that instead of reading final product, reading work in progress, I think is really helpful.
Kind of like the writing group that we do.
Yeah, but Tyler's point is that there's no product really to a scholarship group.
What would the goal of the community, the learning community, be? I guess with scholarship, I think it's a really cool idea.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting point. I'm not quite sure how at the end it would maybe report on progress in their scholarship, especially if you're working on scholarship, people's progress in their scholarship, people's the conversations that happen, maybe some collaborations
or maybe a colloquial, like a college colloquium.
Yeah, where people report out the
right.
progress they made over the course of the year.
Yeah.
I mean, I think
a sub part of the what is that, Scholars in Action for Faculty? What's that called?
Right, Scholars in Action. Well, for faculty. I don't
I know they do that.
Oh.
Yeah.
So it was over in Judd last year.
Right.
So it'd be like maybe a sub part of that.
Yeah.
when does that happen? Because I didn't.
It's like the day before Scholars in Action. It's
Usually
I want to say
April.
April.
Like the
Yeah.
afternoon before or something, yeah.
So, because I was here, but I must have missed a memo. I didn't see anything. Did you see
do
the
that?
answer?
It was
Yeah.
2 years ago. I don't know.
Because I think
It
that's
definitely
something.
happened 2 years ago. I was on maternity leave, so I missed it. So I remember that. I don't know, but also happened last year.
Joanna Brady left, and it was all sort of chaotic last year with Scholars in Action, so maybe it didn't get organized for last year. And it was,
I mean, it's funny, we kind of shrugged off logistics a little bit, but in a sense, this college, I mean, that's one of the other things I was going to talk about is the feel of academia kind of gets trumped, I think, by like athletics, for example. I'm not saying that's a good or a bad thing. It's just it's just the identity, right, perhaps, of the school. But maybe there does need to be some sort of look at how scholarship is kind of advertised and marketed, right, in some sense on campus.
Well, in terms of logistics too, I mean, and I don't know about this event, but I can tell you, planning events at this campus is incredibly challenging. So when we did Operation Kickstart over in Hickory, notice it was in Hickory, not here. We couldn't do it here because we tried to book out like 4 months ahead of time and it was booked already. This whole space, this entire building was booked.
wow.
So we couldn't use our own space. We had to use space over there. And it was logistically a nightmare. And then get food. And I ran new faculty orientation a couple weeks ago. So not only was it a pain to get everything here, they dumped. Did you know they dumped the food? They had to go back and get it. That's why food was late one day.
No.
They dumped all of our food around the corner over there.
Oh, no.
The whole cart went over, and they had to go back and get it again. So logistics are a challenge, right? So just in terms of like those kinds of events, but then to get scholarship pushed out too, there's so much that comes out. I'm actually surprised at the sheer volume of things that hit my inbox on a daily basis about things on campus. And so it is hard to push that out. I think the faculty, we need to sort of, push that as something that we want to know about. And actually, as we talk about this, the center, our title is, teaching, learning, and scholarship. What could we do to help with that? How could we promote that? I mean, I'd love to have some kind of alert. So, and actually, have faculty let us know when they publish something, and we can send a link out when we send out our weekly newsletter about faculty publishing things, so that people begin to see what faculty are putting out there. I think that'd be kind of cool if we linked out our articles or whatever we do, so people saw it. Because I actually believe there's more publications going on campus than people are aware of.
Is it information in Laurel's though?
Mhm.
It does go on
You-
Laurel's.
If you have a
You
link in
put
there,
that
and then
out there,
people
though.
could click on it if they're
Yeah,
interested.
that's
Yeah,
true.
and we are
Yeah,
talking
yeah.
about, you do know Martha wants to do, she talked about this at her talk. She wants to do software where it would actually harvest our names out there, so that things we publish would be collected in a repository, so that then we could actually even produce a CV with that. But then we could link into that, so that, because I think that, because Laurel's, I don't know the culture here, but when I was at Western London, the culture was, if you sent your stuff to that alumni magazine, you were bragging.
That's
So
what I've
nobody
heard.
ever
That's
sent
what
anything over there.
I've heard a colleague of mine has said that to me.
Yeah, I've not heard of that since I've been here.
Yeah, I
thought it was
didn't
the
know that.
deadline. I was just like, when those things come. Oh.
Yeah.
It just takes extra time, really.
Yeah, I look
that's
at it. I
my
look
thing.
at
Yeah,
it more
exactly,
as
yeah.
that as like I'm just trying to do the work.
That's right.
Like,
That's right. That's right. So, but it would be great. So if we could have just a link to it, so people could just take a look. I think that might be kind of interesting. I mean, maybe we think about that. But
your bigger question is, how do we cultivate a culture of scholarship and academia on this campus? And that's like a huge. I mean, sign me up. I'm all in. But yeah, I don't know.
I think that there's a bit of I think there's opportunity as. I think there's opportunity as new folks come in. I had a conversation with a colleague about needing to see something tangible this over the course of the academic year, and really got to the root of why there's a bit of apprehension. So got to that. But on a side note, the thought of when we had our school meeting and listening to all the new folks coming in, and they have these research agendas, like people are bringing. So I think let's more so capitalize on that change, and that can help to transition the culture, I think, a little bit.
yeah, and I think helping faculty recognize that, let's say you're coming from a research institution with where you did big stuff with graduate students, is that you can do things here if you think about managing your logistics here when you don't have the graduate students, but you can use undergraduates or partner with someone. I think that's part. Now in the humanities, it's a little different because of the way you folks do your scholarship, but I think it's figuring out ways to make it work with where you are. And I think that's a message. I mean, we brought in 34 new faculty, and you're right. They all did have research. They've had some agenda. Part of it is, I mean, I've heard faculty say, "Well, we're told that doesn't matter here," and that's a message we have to try to stop spreading.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, yes, when I'm thinking about this, so my background is I came from R1 institutions. I was 7 years at Arizona State. I was a few years at the University of Florida. I was at Michigan State where I did my research. Prior to coming to this, my life was research. That's all I did. And the reason why I came to Springfield College was because I didn't want that to be my life anymore. So I wanted to focus on my students. That's what helped me. That's what I enjoyed most about being a professor. And so I made a conscious decision to come to a smaller school because of that. And I don't want to, I mean, I guess if I were to continue, because I can, if you want me to publish, I can publish. Like it's, just doing it. Like, yeah, sometimes it's just getting up, just do it. Like if we want to do it, just do it. But, it's, I don't know, I don't have that, it leaves a bad taste in my mouth. Like I want to do something that has more meaning. Like I want to answer questions that have more meaning to us, and not just me, like collectively as a unit, as a Springfield College unit.
Yeah.
And that's what I really want to do. And I know there's some parts to that, but that's essentially, if there's, and that's what I was hoping. Like if experiential learning, I absolutely love.
Mhm.
And however we call it and conceptualize it,
Yeah.
and we can come to some sort of, but the whole idea of having purpose behind what we do beyond our classroom, that's meaningful to me. Like
Mhm.
that's why I embedded it in my classrooms. Honestly, I don't know the actual language to it. I don't know if one is versus another. I just know that I have a very basic philosophy. If you can help, you do.
Mhm.
And I tell my students, guess what? You can, so you do too.
So
And that's how I figure it out. I have no idea how to get it to work, but I'd love to be surrounded by other people who figure it out as well. Like,
Uh-huh.
and that's a problem that they are passionate about.
I mean, I agree. And I don't think when we talk about scholarship here, I don't think anybody wants Springfield to become an R1 place.
No.
And
Can't
I don't
even be
think,
authority.
what's that?
Can't even be authority
Yeah,
at this point.
I mean, the idea is to, and this is where I had a conversation with the chairs about this, and it's about how to define scholarship. And I think that part of it is kind of remaining engaged, and you're doing that. I mean, no matter what, you're doing that with the work you're doing. And so it's thinking about how scholarship impacts what you do in the classroom, and what you're doing with the kind of teaching you're doing is using that scholarship. So it's I mean, most of us are at a small school because we don't want to be at an R1 putting out. I'll say within my discipline, within psychology, it's 1 or 2 peer-reviewed articles a year
Right.
at an R1 place, pretty much, for you to remain sort of okay. More than that, if you were to move up, depends on where you are. None of us, very few of us, I think that's the goal. But the goal is to remain active. And how do you do that in a way that I think improves what you do in the classroom?
Because your story, like what you described, there's an audience for that.
Oh,
So that sense of blending
Yeah.
what it is that we're passionate about. If we're passionate about teaching, there are people who are just as passionate about teaching and sharing those stories, and that's still scholarship.
you and I had a conversation about scholarship for teaching and learning. That's exactly what you're doing.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And so maybe we need a faculty learning committee on how to operationalize scholarship.
Part of my thing too is that this takes a lot of time.
Mhm.
Like doing this process, like you're saying, the logistics of all these are immense.
Uh-huh.
And I need help with maybe somebody else coming in and looking and say, you know what, are you doing all this stuff and it's almost a wasted opportunity because we could be learning about this in this way, shape, or form. And I would love for another person, like another set of eyes to come and say, this is a great opportunity. Or did you think about this? Hey, can you inject this piece to this? You know what, I have this type of background and we're learning about this concept. Would you be willing to maybe make this change to see, can this work?
Mhm.
And then we can maybe do something with this from a scholarship perspective.
Yeah. And then there's conferences, Ariel, where people would be calling you up trying to find out how to do this kind of stuff. So, I mean, this is exactly the kind of thing, and it's helping your students and it's helping the community. I mean, to me, that's the kind of scholarship. I mean, I do almost all solo stuff at this point because I want to help students learn more effectively. That's my passion. And I want to do it in a way where I know what I'm doing. I believe I have evidence to show my students are learning more effectively. That's what I care about. I mean, I'm unashamedly, first and foremost, I want to be in the classroom. Bree has commented that I'm happier this semester I'm teaching. I come back smiling. I come back smiling after my class. I'm happy. I've got them riled up, thinking, wait till tomorrow when I bring the stick. I'm really riled.
And they're smiling too.
They are happy. Yeah, I bring the stick on Tuesday. We'll see. But I think that kind of scholarship is the kind of stuff that ignites our students too. It gets our students interested because they see scholarship when people talk about it as people behind a microscope. They don't have any idea about this whole intellectual world. And exposing them to that gives them the opportunity to then think about how they might go out and do this kind of stuff if they want to. And it's not whether or not they want to, but it exposes them to this kind of area. I mean, I see what you're talking about is right in line with the scholarship for teaching or the scholarship of community and engagement. There's a lot of really good stuff out there that feels like you're not doing scholarship because it's not the R1 stuff you were doing before, but it really is. Wow.